April 3, 2016. Valletta, Malta. A blast of early morning light hits the limestone buildings. In a garage less than a kilometer from the offices of the country's prime minister, a 53-year-old woman named Daphne Caruana Galizia climbs into her leased Peugeot 108. She turns the key. The explosion is heard for miles. It doesn't just shatter glass, it shatters a nation's illusion of safety. Daphne, Malta's most famous and feared investigative journalist, is dead. A car bomb, an assassination in broad daylight in an EU member state. The investigation that follows is a global spectacle. It leads to arrests, to political upheaval. But it also leads inexorably down a rabbit hole that points far beyond Malta. It points to a hidden world of shell companies, secret trusts, and laundered billions. It points to the Panama Papers and to the man who knew how the whole system worked. This is not a story about a murder. It is a story about architecture, the invisible architecture of the global financial system, designed not to facilitate commerce, but to guarantee secrecy. And about the one man who tried to hand us the blueprint, only to show us that in a house built on shadows, the light itself is a lethal threat. The setup. The island of secrets. To understand the death, you must first understand the ecosystem. Malta is not just a Mediterranean island. It is a financial services hub, a tiny EU gateway where billions in Russian, Azerbaijani, and Middle Eastern money flow through labyrinthine corporate structures to achieve one goal: anonymity. This isn't back-alley crime. This is the legitimate system. A multi-trillion-dollar industry of law firms, banks, and corporate service providers who build Russian dolls of corporate ownership. A company in the British Virgin Islands, owned by a trust in Panama, managed by a nominee director in Malta. Each layer is a legal barrier, a door that journalists, police, and tax authorities are not allowed to open. Daphne Caruana Galizia spent her career trying to kick those doors down. She called Malta a mafia state. She wrote blog posts naming names, politicians, businessmen, their wives, their shell companies. She was the island's immune response, and the EIA, infection, was fighting back. Her murder wasn't the end of the story. It was the key that unlocked the next chapter. Because to cover their tracks, the conspirators needed a specialist. They needed a banker who knew the maze from the inside. They needed John McCuish, the whistleblower, the man in the middle. John McCuish was not a journalist. He was a compliance officer, a short, meticulous, Scottish former banker who had worked for years in the heart of the beast for the now notorious Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. His job was to be the gatekeeper, the man who ensured the firm's thousands of shell companies weren't obviously used for crime while maintaining the sacred principle of client confidentiality. In 2016, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, received the largest data leak in history, 11.5 million documents from Mossack Fonseca, the Panama Papers. They needed guides. They needed someone who could read the hieroglyphics of offshore finance, who could explain what a bearer share was, and how money really moved. They found McCuish. He became a central, confidential source. For months, he helped journalists decipher the labyrinth he helped administer. He saw his old work exposed on front pages worldwide. He saw the system's ugliest secrets laid bare. The billions stolen from developing nations, the tax evasion by the global elite, the hidden wealth of dictators and criminals. He was terrified. He knew the stakes. He had seen what happened to Daphne Caruana Galizia for probing just one corner of this world. He was now helping expose the entire blueprint. He began to speak cautiously to a few journalists. He gave interviews. He explained the mechanics of the Panama machine. He was the human voice for the 11.5 million documents. And then the system he exposed began to turn its gaze upon him. The pressure. When the law is the weapon, John McCuish did not fear thugs in alleyways. He feared lawyers. He feared the system using its own rules to crush him. The defamation machine. After the papers broke, Mossack Fonseca didn't just deny wrongdoing. They and their powerful clients launched a global campaign of litigation and intimidation. They sued newspapers. They threatened journalists. The goal was not to win in court, but to bankrupt, to exhaust, to bury critics in a decade of legal discovery and legal fees. McCuish, as a known source, was in the crosshairs. The regulatory black hole. McCuish had reported suspicious activity internally while at Mossack Fonseca. He had followed the official compliance channels, and he had been ignored. The system is designed to simulate oversight, not provide it. When he blew the whistle externally, he wasn't protected by whistleblower laws. They were weak, inconsistent, and didn't apply across the international jurisdictions he was dealing with. The legal framework for protection was a Swiss cheese, and he was falling through the holes. The psychological siege. He lived with constant low-grade dread. He changed his phone. He was careful about meetings. The stress was corrosive. He was a man who understood the full planet-spanning power of the forces he had challenged. He knew they didn't need to kill him. They could simply sue him into oblivion or wait for the pressure to do its work. In December 2017, John McCuish gave a final, haunting interview to the Sunday Times. He described the overwhelming stress. He said he felt abandoned by the system. He spoke of the dark forces at play. 2 weeks later, he was dead. The conclusion, the convenient verdict. On December 26, 2017, John McCuish's body was found near his home in Essex, England. A plastic bag was over his head. There was a note. The police investigation lasted less than 48 hours. The verdict, suicide. The world moved on, a tragic postscript to the Panama Papers saga, a troubled man overcome by stress. But to those who knew him, who had worked with him, the official story felt like the final, flawless operation of the system he had exposed. Consider the mechanics. A man who knew the intimate secrets of how the global elite hides its wealth, who was actively helping journalists connect those secrets to real-world corruption and murder, dies alone in a field. The case is closed with breathtaking speed. No in-depth forensic accounting of his fears. No exploration of the threats he documented. His death, like the shell companies he once managed, is rendered a private matter, a closed file. His suicide was not just a personal tragedy. It was a systemic output. It was the logical result of a global architecture built to protect capital by any means necessary, and is the architecture that includes, as one of its features, the capacity to isolate, pressure, and discard a single human being who becomes a liability. The system isn't run by a cartel of assassins. It's run by lawyers in air-conditioned offices who send carefully worded letters. The violence is financial, legal, psychological, and it is just as effective. AD break. Speaking of complex invisible systems and the pressure they exert, let's talk about the framework for your own investigation. You're building a documentary about this layered global story. You need audio that conveys cold institutional power, the paranoia of being watched, and the crushing weight of legal silence. You need the sound of a document shredder, the sterile click of a keyboard in an offshore bank, the tense silence of a safe house meeting, the final hollow verdict of a coroner's court. But creating that soundscape without entangling yourself in a web of rights can feel like its own form of legal jeopardy. That's where epidemic sound comes in. Consider it your evidentiary archive for sound. A massive library of high-quality, royalty-free music and sound effects. No discovery process, no depositions. Just direct access to thousands of tracks, from cold, minimalist scores that mimic spreadsheet logic and surveillance, to tense, psychological drones, to the stark, empty sounds of isolation and despair. Need the sound of a fax machine receiving a legal threat in a quiet office, the distant digital hum of a server farm in a tax haven, the ominous final tick of a coroner's clock. They've got it. Their search tools help you subpoena the precise audio evidence. Right now, Epidemic Sound is offering a free trial. Use the link in the description to access the library. Thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this forensic audit of power. Now back to the blueprint McCuish left behind. The blueprint he unveiled, a system designed to fail. McCuish's real testimony wasn't about specific crimes. It was about the design flaws in global finance. He explained how the system is meant to be opaque. 1. The illusion of compliance. Firms like Mossack Fonseca have compliance departments not to catch criminals, but to provide plausible deniability. They follow the letter of weak, form-filling laws, know your customer, while willfully ignoring the spirit. They create a paper trail that says we checked, even when the check is a meaningless formality. 2. The diffusion of responsibility. Money moves through 5, 6, 7 jurisdictions. The lawyer in Panama points to the nominee director in Samoa, who points to the bank in Cyprus. No single person or country has the full picture or the legal authority to act. Responsibility is dissolved across borders. 3. The weaponization of privacy. Client confidentiality and data protection laws, designed to protect individuals, are perverted to protect illicit capital. To question the money is to violate privacy. To follow the money is legally impossible. McCuish showed that this isn't a bug in the system. It is the system's core feature. It is a wealth shield, engineered by the world's top law firms and banks, and tacitly approved by governments who benefit from the fees and the inflows of dark capital. His death proved the system's final safeguard. When the shield is threatened, the human components facing the most pressure can be expected to fail quietly. The legacy, the unfixed flaw. In the years since, what has changed? Some minor reforms, a few more forms to fill out. Mossack Fonseca is gone, but the ecosystem is intact. The money has flowed to new firms in new jurisdictions. The Pandora Papers, the Paradise Papers, more leaks, same story. The system McCuish helped expose is resilient. It adapts. It incorporates the scandal into its own legend, becoming ever more sophisticated. Daphne Caruana Galicia's killers were eventually convicted, low-level operatives. The masterminds remain in the shadows, protected by the same layers of complexity she fought against. McCuish's death remains a suicide, a personal tragedy, not a systemic one. We have normalized this. We accept that vast secret wealth is a fact of the modern world, that journalists who chase it get blown up, that sources who explain it die under mysterious stress. We file it under how things are. The revelation. So, what killed John McCuish? The revelation is not about a bag over his head. The revelation is that John McCuish was a stress test on the global financial system, and the system performed exactly as designed. It identified a point of failure, a human conscience with actionable knowledge, and applied calibrated, legal and psychological pressure until that point failed. His death was not a murder in the classic sense. It was a byproduct, a lethal emission from a machine whose sole purpose is to preserve secrecy. The machine doesn't need to assassinate. It just needs to maintain an environment of impunity, legal threat, and overwhelming asymmetry of power. In that environment, despair is not an accident. It is a predictable outcome. McCuish and Caruana Galizia bookend the same truth. She was killed for asking questions the system forbids. He was, the system suggests, killed by the stress of knowing the answers. The Panama Papers were not just a leak. They were an X-ray of the world's power structure. John McCuish was the radiologist pointing to the tumor on the film. And then he became a casualty of the very disease he helped diagnose. His story reveals the ultimate grotesque efficiency of modern illicit finance. It has outsourced its violence. It doesn't require gangsters. It uses lawyers to intimidate, regulators to obfuscate, and the slow, grinding wheels of legal process and psychological isolation to neutralize threats. The end result is the same: silence. We look for a villain in a shadowy room. The villain is in the fine print. The villain is the gap between jurisdictions. The villain is the law that protects capital more fiercely than it protects the people who dare to reveal its secrets. John McCuish didn't just expose hidden money, he exposed the killing floor of the global economy, and he became its most eloquent and final witness.